Good morning. My name's Tom Schmidt. I'm the executive director here at the center, at least for a little while yet, and until I retire. And this is kind of, for me, like going back in time. I used to be I was a school teacher, a principal, and a superintendent. And this is kind of like faculty meetings, but everybody sits in the back, goes all the way to the back, except I don't think I have phys ed teachers here that sit in the back row like it used to be at a faculty meeting. But welcome to the Robert H. Jackson Center. We're glad you're here today. This is the first time we've had this teacher conference here at the center. We have some wonderful speakers for you today. We have some very good breakout sessions. So we're excited about this, and we hope that you enjoy it too. We're going to ask for your opinions when we're done, and please give them to us honestly so that we can do this better, even do it better next year if we have to. I want to thank Joe Carb and Drew Biter who are our education directors here at the center. That's one of their 43 or 44 hats that they wear in their lives. I know they do many different things, but they have done this program in Buffalo before, and this year we thought, let's try bringing it down here, and we're kind of glad we did. We have teachers here from all over Western New York and from Warren, Pennsylvania, and we're very pleased that we have folks from 2 different states here. So I hope throughout the day you get an opportunity when you get into a workshop to introduce yourself to somebody new, or sit at lunch with somebody you don't know. I know it's like talking to what we tell the kids sometimes, but sit with people you don't know and pick their brains about what they're doing, and I always find that is very helpful for meeting new people. A few things. If you're going to use the Wi-Fi here, I can give you the Wi-Fi password. If it's actually probably in your booklet, in your packet under our phone number. It's 716-483-6646. It's in your folder. If you look on the business card in there, you'll see the phone number, and that's our Wi-Fi password if you use it. Now, if you all go on it at the same time, it's just going to crush it, but if you need it, that's what it is. Today, another exciting thing for us today, when you walk out these doors, and if you go to your left, that's our exhibit hall. And today is the first day that we've opened the doors on a brand new exhibit. It's called Justice Matters, The Road to Nuremberg. If you get a chance to take a quick walk through there, Jen Champ, who is standing over there, Jen is our curator, and she did she stayed here till 10 last night to make sure this thing was done. But it's a fantastic exhibit. She's put it together over the last few months, and we hope that you get a chance to take a look at that. It's quite informative, and I think you're going to enjoy it. We just finished up a fantastic exhibit on Mary Willard, who was the mentor of Robert Jackson through his educational years. That is going to become a traveling exhibit. It's going to open actually at Fredonia State University in April, right, Jen? It's going to go on display in April there. And then we're hoping to have a piece of it that can go to schools that teachers can use, and to say, hey, here's who was the person in your life that got you to where you are? Well, she was the person that got Robert Jackson, I think, to where he was and how he was able to do many of the things he did in his life. Also, just so you know, we have available at the center, this is my time for doing a little promoting. Many of you, if you're in Chautauqua County, have this book already. This is called Robert H. Jackson. It's about Robert H. Jackson. It's written on a level that many of your students in junior high and high school can understand. We have those available at the center. And we also have our Liberty Under Law DVD. This was just released in May. This is a 90-minute documentary on Jackson. It's 90 minutes. It's available here for sale, of course. But the exciting thing is we had it created into a 60-minute version for public broadcasting, and its premiere will be on WNED out of Buffalo on December 22nd at 10 p.m. And so we're really excited about that, because we know WPSU and what's the one in Erie? QLN. They're all picking it up right after the first of the year, along with some places in Ohio. And from there, and we're understanding it could get distributed around the country. So that's a pretty good thing for us. For those of you who don't know who Robert Jackson was, real quickly, he was a Solicitor General of the United States, an Attorney General of the United States. He was a Supreme Court Justice, and he was the Chief Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. Today, many of Justice Jackson's works and writings are cited in current Supreme Court cases. For example, the case that was just out on equal marriage, probably one of the biggest cases in years. Both sides of that issue cited Jackson, which we're going, interesting. But it was pretty interesting. They went back to his writings, and they both used him as an example in what he said. So he is probably one of the greatest writers of all time that could be on the Supreme Court. And that's why we have the center here, for his legacy, and then to promote education and programs like this. So I guess that's enough from me. You have your center, you have your folder. In your folder is a copy of the schedule for the day, some information about the center, and a few other things. So we'll talk about some of those again later. But I'm going to introduce Dana Serer from Erie Two Boces, and she is now going to talk to you for a few minutes. Dana?
Bring us down a little bit. Good morning, everyone, and so glad to be here. This is my first time at the Jackson Center. I'm very glad to have a day of learning and working with educators from across our region, and I believe also from Pennsylvania, so woot woot to you guys too. Your goldenrod is to share with you getting on Twitter. One way to share and collaborate and curate and ask questions and find answers is through social media. So the goldenrod handout gives you just a quick cheat sheet on how to sign up with Twitter. If you're on Twitter, really asking you to kind of put yourself out there today and share and maybe tag a new friend that's in the room with us today. The hashtag is Jackson15. And if you would like to know more about Twitter and how to incorporate it into your professional work or in your classroom for students taking informed action, you can find Erie 1 and Erie 2 in the green room at our breakout session. So have a great day and tweet away.
Thank you, Dana. Our first speaker this morning is a close friend of a lot of us here at the center. Jim Johnson is the former president and CEO of the Jackson Center. He is also a former prosecutor at Sierra Leone in the trials there, and he is currently he's also currently our international fellow for the Jackson Center upon his retirement from here. He's also now he's doing a lot of things. He's currently also a professor of law at Case Western University. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jim Johnson.
Let's go ahead and cue up the video. Hi, it's really great to be here this morning. It's always great to be back at the center. And, Tom talked a little bit about this initiative, our education initiative that we have. And looking at the audience, I can really be one of those to say that this is absolutely incredible. Because I can remember 3 years ago when we did the first teachers workshop at the Jackson Center, I think we had 8, didn't we? That's right, we had 8 teachers. And you look now, and we're close to 90 teachers in here today. This is absolutely phenomenal, and it just shows how this is taking off and how it's important and how it's relevant and where is Robert H. Jackson in our lives today and why he should be there. You know, when they asked me to speak for the first few minutes this morning, and Joe and Drew said, well, your topic is why we're here. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I'll try. I mean, I don't really know a lot about the origins of the universe and why, how all of the things came together, on how mankind developed and all of this. And so I went and watched every episode of The Big Bang Theory. And although entertaining, it helped me not at all in figuring out what I was going to talk about today. So I called Drew last night and I said, Drew, I just can't do this. I don't know that much about how mankind came to be. And he went, no, Jim. That's not what we want. We want you to talk about why we're here for Robert H. Jackson. What makes this person so darn significant, so important, the things that he did in his life, And that's all wonderful because a lot of people have a building named after him, have a center named after him. But why is it so important that the lessons of Robert H. Jackson's life be communicated to our youth today? What did he do that was so darn important and you know, taking it a step farther, so darn significant and so darn relevant for what we're doing today and what we're doing, for crying out loud, what you're doing today, that we should learn about him and we should teach the lessons of his life to our young people. And I said, oh, I can do that. And so here we are today as part of this initiative to help getting Robert H. Jackson out to our youth. The lessons of his life are just as relevant today. Go ahead, cue the video.
Of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. This tribunal, while it is novel and experimental, is not the product of abstract speculation, nor is it created to vindicate legalistic theories. This inquest represents the practical effort of four of the most mighty of nations, with the support of 15 more, to utilize international law.
There is no count in the indictment that cannot be proved by books and records. The Germans were always meticulous record keepers, and these defendants had their share of the Teutonic passion for thoroughness in putting things on paper. Nor were they without vanity. They arranged frequently to be photographed in action. We will show you their own films. You will see their own conduct and hear their own voices as these defendants reenact for you some of the events in the course of the conspiracy. We would also make clear that we have no purpose to incriminate the whole German people. I'll take up the subject of crimes in the conduct of the war.
That day, not every eye in the world was focused on Robert H. Jackson, but certainly every ear in the world, listening to it, coming across on radio, coming across on all the media. Everybody was focused on that trial and that man at the end of World War II. The significance of that trial and what that man did in bringing together all of the conditions for that trial cannot be understated. He said this was an experiment, novel in history. That is absolutely true. Up until the end of the 1800s, war was not illegal. Starting an aggressive war was not illegal. Going to using war as a means to expand your territory was not illegal and accepted and done all the time, right up through the 1800s. You look to the way this country was created. Look to the way so many countries were created. In the start of the 20th century, everybody started, particularly in the aftermath of World War I, everybody started looking, there's got to be a better way. And there were, of course, efforts after World War I to outlaw aggressive war. But it was not until the end of World War II, through the force of will of this man, to the force of persuading our allies that we need to handle the aftermath of World War II, that we need to take those responsible for the millions and millions of deaths in World War II, that we need to let the rule of law apply, that we need to take them to trial. So indeed, this was the very, very first international tribunal, international criminal tribunal, to hold those responsible. So who in the devil is this man? How did he get to this point, to where everyone in the world was watching or listening to him? How did he get to the heights of the legal community in both nationally and internationally? And so for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you a whole lot on just how he got there. We like to think of Robert H. Jackson and his impact coming in three ways. First of all, the man himself. How did someone born in northwestern Pennsylvania, just across the border, raised in western New York, in Frewsburg and Jamestown, someone who did not go to college, how did he get to this height? How did he do the things that he did? So we're going to take just a few minutes and talk about that. As I said, born just right across the border in Pennsylvania in 1892. He went to high school in Frewsburg, right down here, just, Frewsburg, the suburb of Jamestown, let's call it. He went to high school in Frewsburg, graduated high school in Frewsburg, but wanted more education. Unable to go on to college at that time, he came to the big city. He came to Jamestown. And he did a 13th year of high school. I don't know that anybody today, would anybody today want to do a 13th year of high school? Unless, of course, they were told, you're not going to graduate unless you do that 13th year of high school. But he willingly went and did a 13th year of high school. It was at that point he came under the tutelage of an incredible teacher. And this is a story in and of itself. This is a story that shows how the impact of one teacher can have on a man and set him on a path that will make him, known throughout the world and the country. But under the tutelage of Mary Willard, he took that 13th year of high school, read the classics, did all of the things that you would want to do if you were getting a 13th year of high school and you had no pressure. Of course, to Robert H. Jackson, the pressure is what made it worthwhile. So he did that 13th year of high school. Of course, his dad wanted him to become a doctor. He wanted to be a lawyer. Being a lawyer myself, I have no idea why, but he wanted to be a lawyer. And so he went to apprentice for his uncle, Frank Mott, for a little bit. And then he went off to Albany Law School for 1 year. Completed a 2-year program in 1 year. They wouldn't give him a diploma because he wasn't 21 years of age. They finally, I think when he was appointed to the Supreme Court, Albany Law School decided we ought to fix that. And so they gave him a diploma. But anyway, they gave him a certificate, but no diploma. And he went on to practice law for the next 20-odd years, meeting right here in Jamestown, became an extremely prominent lawyer. But meeting when he was 18 years old or 19 years old, who else but Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Jackson took an interest in Democratic politics, very big in the Democratic Party in a very, very Republican county, and became very, very successful. And as I said, when Roosevelt was elected president, Jackson essentially went with him to Washington. First worked in the Bureau of Revenue, the IRS. Ooh, gosh, can you think of that? Went to work in the IRS. Prosecuted Andrew Mellon for tax evasion, one of the richest men in the country, former Secretary of the Treasury, prosecuted him for tax evasion and won, and quickly moved up. Assistant Attorney General, Solicitor General. Of course, as many in the Supreme Court wanted him to be Solicitor General for life. Solicitor General, Attorney General, and Supreme Court Justice. The only man to hold all three of those positions, and you will never see that repeated. We've had justices, I think we have 2 current justices, at least 1, if not 2, that have also been Solicitor Generals, but it is unlikely that you will ever see one man hold those 3 positions again, let alone someone who came from a very, very humble background. and through sheer will and initiative and wanting to do more, became what became. There's your first lesson right there, in that you can start from a very, very humble background, and you can rise to the powers and become world renowned in your field. The Supreme Court. Tom mentioned earlier how Jackson was known and thought to be one of the best writers on the Supreme Court. Certainly, in anybody's list, he'll come out in the top 5. There's no question about that. But this is where you're starting to see his national life and his impact on the national life. He had significant impact as Attorney General on national life. In fact, his guidance to his Justice Department when he was Attorney General, quite frankly, is still looked at today by current Attorney Generals. But he went to the Supreme Court and made his impact on our national life. Many of the decisions are still looked at today and are still relevant today. First one we have is West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. The flag saluting case, the Pledge of Allegiance case. Jackson is the one that came through, and of course this quote, you can take a minute. Many of you have probably heard this quote before. Some of you may even have it memorized. But this talks about who we are and what we are more than anything else, and what we're trying to do. Second major case before the end of the war was the Korematsu case, the internment case. Jackson was the one that had although he was part of the dissent, and although the Supreme Court upheld the internment, Jackson was the one that was willing to stand up against the internment. It is his dissent in that case that is looked upon today as the law. Although the case at the Supreme Court level has never been overturned, everybody looks at Jackson's dissent as the state of the law. The war, the end of the war was coming. Of course, Jackson was very much part of President Roosevelt's kitchen cabinet. As you can see, Roosevelt progressively put him in positions of increasing responsibility. And I'm glossing over a whole lot in a very short period of time. But the end of World War II, Truman looked upon Jackson to bring justice to those victims of the war. And it was Robert H. Jackson that, through his force of will, and we're at the 70th anniversary of that right now. In fact, that speech that you just saw, I think on the 21st, is the 70th anniversary of that speech. I fortunately get to go to Nuremberg here tomorrow, actually, to be part of a conference focused around the 70th anniversary of that speech. But what Jackson did was, through the Nuremberg Tribunal, through convincing our allies that we need to go to trial, and not, of course, Stalin, you can imagine what his opinion was at the end of the war and what we should do with the Nazi leaders. And, Churchill wasn't too far off of that. Churchill didn't see a lot of point in this either. But convinced our allies that we need to go to trial and that we need to apply the rule of law. This is, of course, the third prong of Robert H. Jackson. And in my next session, my breakout session, I'll spend some time talking about the international criminal tribunals today. In other words, the direct legacy of this right here, and how Jackson's work set the stage for the international tribunals today. And we'll talk a little bit about that in my next piece. Let's see. Oh, I am time for questions. Okay, so let me wrap it up. And we'll even talk a little bit about terrorism and what's going on in the world today, and what, if anything, an international criminal court might have in that respect. But very, very quickly, I just want to touch on, of course, coming out of the Nuremberg trial, the international crimes that we recognize today. Unfortunately, crimes against peace are not part of the current international tribunals, but the others, what came international tribunal, and quite importantly, the next two bullets there, when you really think about it, it set the precedent that leaders can be tried, that there was no head of state immunity, that the sovereign wasn't the sovereign in all respects. Remember, the sovereign can do no wrong? This changed that. The sovereign can do wrong and can be held individually criminally responsible for what he's done. After Nuremberg, very quickly, he returned to the Supreme Court. The two, I've glossed over 4 cases of many cases. But the steel seizure case is very much worth mentioning. And this is another reason why Jackson's life is so important in what you're doing today. Because coming out of the steel seizure case, Jackson set forth a 3-part test to be looked at when you decide if the president's action, typically by executive order, are legal, and when the president has exceeded his authority by executive order. That case is looked at today. You will probably hear it in the news again very, very soon. As you heard it, it was in the news when President Obama took action on immigration by executive order. You keep looking forward on what additional actions will be taken in this conflict that we're currently involved in the refugee issue, on bringing refugees to the United States. This could very well prop up again. I wouldn't be surprised if it would, depending on what the president does, because of course now we have governors saying, we're not going to take them in our state, NIMBY, not in our backyard. And so what will the president be required by executive action to do something in that case? And when that happens, they're going to look at the steel seizure case and the 3-part test that came out of that. And of course, moving forward, the international tribunals today. Okay, I am out of time. I promised Drew that I would stay on time. I think we have 3 minutes if you have any questions. If you want to hear more, come and see me again in an hour. But gosh, any questions on that? Okay, save the questions for the breakout session. All right. Thank you.
My name is Joe Karb, and I'm one of the co-directors of education for the Jackson Center. And it's my pleasure today to introduce S.G. Grant. I consider myself very lucky because Professor Grant was my professor at the University of Buffalo. And in his classes, I really learned the importance of big ideas in history, and this is reflected in the Toolkit Project today. S.G. went on to become the founding dean of the School of Education at Binghamton University, and most recently, he was one of the directors of the Toolkit Project. And the thing is, this project almost didn't happen. If it wasn't for SG and a few other educators around the state, the $3 million would have gone to ELA. But they figured out a way to bring it to Binghamton University, and the result is fantastic. This is a project that New York State got right. It was written by teachers for teachers, and I can attest to that because I was a writer for 7th grade. And New York State is really the only state in the country to spend race to the top money on social studies. And this project is having a national impact. States around the country are starting to use it. So please join me in welcoming Project Director, Professor S.G. Grant.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Come on. It's, good Lord, you've been teaching for 3 hours already. Good morning. Good morning. Nicely done, nicely done. This work matters. Let me tell you a very quick story why it matters. One of our teachers who was piloting one of the inquiries that we developed, 2nd grade teacher over near Rochester, had been working with her kids for about an hour or so on a unit related to rules. Now, if you know anything about 2nd graders, you know that rules matter. Not that they always are followed in a matterly kind of way, but that they matter. So these kids had been working pretty diligently. When one of them came up to her and said, you know, this has been the best recess we have ever had. Now, she's a veteran teacher. She doesn't get thrown that often, but 2nd graders can throw anybody, right? So she looked at him and she said, well, that's great, but we actually haven't had recess yet today. Like a 2nd grader, he said, well, what have we been doing? She said, well, we've been doing social studies. And he went, yay, social studies. Now, stand up if you've ever heard social studies and recess in the same sentence in a positive kind of way, not recess or social studies getting in the way of recess. That's why this stuff matters. We think we've hit a sweet spot between standards and curriculum and teaching practice and all of the stuff that goes on in schools that we want to have go on in schools. And so it's my absolute pleasure to be with you today to talk about this project that, as Joe said, I think we got pretty close to right. We weren't very close to right a little while ago. We were in pretty desperate straits. No Child Left Behind came out, and the word social studies didn't even appear in that document. It was all literacy all the time. I know literacy is important. I'm pretty sure math is important, but social studies? Social studies? You can do No Child Left Behind, literacy and mathematics, through social studies, but we got left out. We got left out. If that dagger to the heart wasn't bad enough, No Child Left Behind came out, and then, the Common Core came out and essentially reduced social studies, history, and the social sciences to an afterthought. Nobody related to those fields was involved in the project. They appropriated our material, but did it in a kind of a silly kind of way in some cases. Now, there are some good parts to the Common Core, don't get me wrong, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we were in pretty tough shape. I was asked to give a talk at that point about where social studies, what the future of social studies was, and I used the metaphor, we've always been on the back burner. No Child Left Behind pushed us onto the floor, and No Child Left Behind pushed us on the floor. Common Core had us being swept up and on the way to the garbage can. Well, some things then started to happen because I now suspect that we are something like the vampire discipline. We cannot be killed, although a lot of people have tried. So three things are happening. Three things are happening within the last 2 or 3 years. First of all, the College, Career, and Civic Life, C3 Framework for State Social Studies Standards. I was one of the lead writers on that project, largely because I have white hair and have been around social studies a long time, and have been trying to work on this notion of what does it mean to do social studies well. That was a national project, sponsored initially by the Chief State School Officers, and then published eventually by NCSS. Virtually at the same time, New York was going through a process of revising their standards. And so even though these were kind of parallel tracks at the time, the New York framework, as I'll show you in just a second, ended up appropriating the key piece of the C3 framework. So you've got a national effort kind of working to bring social studies back, and then you've got a big state effort like in New York. And then, as Joe said, former Commissioner John King, an old social studies hand, had some leftover, as though $3 million can be left over, $3 million left in Race to the Top money, and was willing to put it behind the development of curriculum for social studies in relationship to the new state framework. Obviously, $3 million comes with the longest title of any project ever. The New York State K-12 Social Studies Resource Toolkit, and, if that's not enough, Professional Development Project. So we know that, that social studies has had kind of a rocky past. We think we're in a pretty good position now to make our way back onto the stage. But we still face some challenges. Social studies curriculum plagued by too much, no kidding. We've been here about 35 minutes now. There have been 3 more pages added to the state framework because something happened somewhere that somebody thinks is important enough to put into the state framework. Those of you who have white hair like I do remember that the old state framework used to be for 11th grade only. 180 days, just like every other grade, but 11th grade only, the state social studies framework, 33 single-spaced pages. The Civil War, probably 1 line of those 33 single-spaced pages. There's an awful lot of stuff when your content area is everything that people have ever thought, done, and said. That's a lot to cover. And of course, it's all important somehow. So we'll never get away from this problem of too much content, but it's something that we feel like through the Toolkit Project we're getting a hold on. Second, social studies instruction's been dominated by the view that we have to teach every person, place, and event before we can ask kids to think about it. We've thought that for a long time. It was a dumb idea then. It's still a dumb idea. You can't wait until kids know everything before they start thinking about it. They come to our classes thinking already. What we don't want them to come to our classes thinking is social studies is dumb, boring, and all the other adjectives that we sometimes hear. So managing the content, managing the instruction, and then we've not gotten a lot of help, frankly, from policymakers. Because typically, standards get developed by one group of people, they get exhausted, they to another group of people who maybe write the curriculum with some of the ideas related to the standards, but then they get tired, and then the state assessment people come in and try to sweep up and create something like an assessment with a very narrow set of parameters. So it's no surprise to see that standards shoot in one way, curriculum kind of in a different way, and assessment, who knows where that goes. So policy-wise, we have not had a very good track record of doing things in very coherent, smart kinds of ways. We're not sure that we're all the way to this kind of coherence, but we're hoping for at least this with the Toolkit Project, because we've got national standards within the last couple of years. We've got state standards that follow, in many ways, the national standards. We've got this curriculum project now that is written by the same sorts of people who were involved in the standards work, and the assessment piece is being written at the same time now as well. I'm not going to say a lot about assessment in my prepared remarks, but let me make 2 points. One is, and write this down in your little notebooks, we absolutely think that the Toolkit work is going to be entirely consistent with the revisions in the new state exams. And I'll point out a couple of places where I think that's going to happen. But the big message is, this sort of is a different message than typically happens, curriculum policy going one direction, assessment policy going in a different direction. We really feel like those things are getting much more in line than they ever have been. So the mission of the Toolkit is to marry the global vision, the big vision of the C3 framework, and then the content specifics of the New York framework in a way that honors, supports, and extends teachers' best efforts. The second thing to write down in your notebooks is, this is no modules. This is not a script. These are not lesson plans. We are not saying to you, everything you've always done is wrong. Do it this way and you will be teacher of the year. We're not saying that. What we are saying is, you bring expertise, knowledge, awareness of what your kids are about, and you need to bring that every day to the toolkit as well. The toolkit is simply a set of ideas that we think will kind of encourage you to think about how you might work through your discipline. I don't know a single field of professional work where people learn how to do it in college and then they never change their ideas after that. Imagine if doctors and nurses learned their craft in medical school and then never took another workshop, never understood how to do anything differently. That's ridiculous. So the idea that teaching would be any different seems equally ridiculous. But telling teachers this is the script that you have to follow for every class in every kid's condition, that is equally ridiculous. So the toolkit really privileges the idea that teachers have knowledge and expertise. They know their subject matter and they know their kids. And so all the toolkit can do, all it should do, is say to you, here's some other ways to think about what you do. Try them out. Try them out. We've lost, kindergarten teachers tell me this all the time, we've lost what it means to have fun in schools, to be playful with ideas. Well, that's what we're about. We're about trying to be playful with ideas in our practices. So in a nutshell, a large nutshell, because you buy a lot of stuff for $3 million, are these 3 parts of the toolkit. The first part, the foundations, the conceptual foundations of what we ended up calling the inquiry design model. We kind of created a model to express this stuff. None of these ideas, none of these 10 ideas are going to shock you. We didn't invent fire with this project. But each one of those ideas we think nicely coheres with the others in a way that provides a really solid kind of base for the work that we're trying to do. The heart of the toolkit, however, is part 2, the grade level inquiries or units. That's where in 84 cases, 6 units or 6 inquiries per grade level, K through 12, 6 K through 11. 12th grade, of course, has the economics and participation in government split. We understood from some people that sometimes the economics and government people don't talk to one another, so you better create 6 inquiries for each of them so that they get along. We were fine with that. 84 inquiries altogether, 6 per grade level. There's no way that 6 inquiries per grade level are going to cover the entire length and scope of the social studies curriculum. So there's lots more work to be done. Creating 84 inquiries just about killed me, but there's a lot more work to be done, and frankly, that's the beauty of this project, is saying to teachers, here's our best shot, take a look at it, fill in where you think makes sense, and take our work and use it to your best advantage. 14 of those inquiries are extended, annotated. The writers like Joe and his 13 colleagues wanted to say more to their teacher peers around the state, and I understand there are PA people here. This project is a national project as well as a state project, so don't feel as though this is only New York related. We have folks in Hawaii, Arkansas, Connecticut, all working with this same kind of model. So 14 of them are sort of an extended version of the inquiries, because not 84, not extended pages of here's what you do next, and then this, and then this, and then this, but extensions, annotations of how you might think about teaching whatever subject matter it is. And then the third part, because we really do believe that professional development, professional learning is so important, we spent some time developing PowerPoint slide sets that cover the entire project. And we ended up working with the Tribeca Film Institute to create a series of videotapes, one of which you'll see today. Oh, excuse me. Videotapes, I guess, shows my age. Videos, there we go. All right. So, in lots and lots of ways, the toolkit really reduces to this one-page blueprint. If we have a toolkit, the construction metaphor works for us, and so we really we really like this idea of creating blueprints for units or inquiry. Every teacher in this room knows you get a dog of a lesson or a unit, you just need some other way to think about it. So you go on the internet, pull up the topic, maybe it's immigration, industrial revolution, some topic like that, and you look for what other people have done. And lots of people have done curriculum work related to those topics. But sometimes it takes you 15 or 20 pages before you get to kind of what they really want to do. And not only is that frustrating, but spending 15 or 20 minutes trying to get through all of that can be a frustrating experience. So we really came up with the idea of being able to represent the entire scope of the unit or the inquiry on one page, so that you can see, love the compelling question, love the first 2 supporting questions, would never do that third supporting question, and love this source, don't like that source, you modify it. Every one of the inquiries that we're producing is published in PDF because it looks pretty, and Word because that's where you get to work. So they look a certain way. Every one of the inquiries has this blueprint page that looks a certain way, that gives you all of the elements of what we consider a coherent unit. But we also invite you to change it, to modify it to the particular students that you have in your class. Because every secondary teacher in this room knows, I was teacher of the year teaching immigration period 1, period 3, I don't know what the hell happened. They look like the same kind of kids. I was teaching the same stuff. I'd had my second cup of coffee, and it just didn't go anywhere. So we know that you have to think about the particular kids who sit in front of you. And so if the supporting questions work for your first period class, but you know they're not going to work for your third period class, we invite you to modify those. All right, I want to talk just quickly about the components here. So there are three big chunks to a blueprint inquiry. First of all, there are questions, a compelling question right up at the top. If you've read the C3 framework, you know that we really committed to the idea of questions being the way that you start an inquiry, not page one of the textbook. Page one of the textbook can be very important, but it's not going to get under kids' skin. It's not going to have them paying attention to you in ways that are going to make them sort of sit up. So we're committed to this idea of a compelling question, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're also committed to the idea of supporting questions. If a compelling question is really, really compelling, maybe it just sort of teaches itself, but probably not. So we really think of this idea of supporting questions, which are located at this level, as providing a kind of architecture, a structure for your kids and you to work through to get to the compelling question. So tasks, if we have kids driving the inquiry, driving the instruction, we want to be able to see how kids are making sense of those things. And we have three different kinds of tasks. We have the staging task. Oops, ho. Goodness. The staging task, right here, is the notion of if you remember Madeline Hunter, the anticipatory set notion, that asking some kind of a question or some kind of a task or activity that's going to sort of launch the whole thing. We also think, as you see, we have formative tasks. That's this box here. One formative task per supporting question. So if you're going to ask kids a supporting question, an architectural kind of question to build to the compelling question, let's see what kinds of sense the kids are making at that time. Formative meaning that as kids are forming their ideas, we get to see them in action and we can intervene if it seems like they need some more instruction. Summative questions, or the summative performance task, is here, and you'll see that there are two kinds. There's an argument and an extension. We firmly believe that if you're going to ask kids a useful, important, powerful question, that you ought to give them an opportunity to actually answer that question. Not ask a really powerful question and then give them a multiple choice test. There's nothing wrong with multiple choice tests, don't get me wrong. But if you're going to ask a question, multiple choice tests may not be the best way to allow kids to express all of the ideas that they have. So every one of the 84 inquiries, every one, K through 12, ends with the kids making and supporting an argument. Now, this is one of the places where I have a little beef with the Common Core folks. K through 3 in the Common Core, how many times do they use the word argument? Say 0. No, say 0. Exactly. Nice, well done. A little coaching, but not bad. What do they use instead of the word argument? K through 3, the Common Core. Opinion. Do kids come to school with opinions? Kids know how to make opinions, right? What do we want in social studies? We'd like to have a little evidence. Opinions, wonderful. But we're really about the idea of, can you support what you think, i.e. your opinion? Can you support that? Now, every dictionary I've ever looked at says, as a definition for the word opinion, statement of belief without, say it all together, evidence. So why would we do that? I don't understand that. Now, to their sort of credit, the Common Core writers did say, every time they used the idea of opinion, they said, with reasons. Well, every dictionary I've ever looked at, when you state a statement of belief with evidence, that's not called an opinion, that's called an argument. So we use the A word, argument, throughout, because we want kids to be able to say what they think. Kindergartners can say what they think about a topic. And then we want them to start working with the idea of why they think that. What convinces them that that's an okay thing to say? And we know that even the youngest kinds of kids can do that. Orally. Kindergarten kids, write this down in your notebooks, should not be writing 5-paragraph essays. Please. They will really hate social studies then. There are all kinds of ways, however, that kindergarten kids, first graders, second graders can express their ideas and the reasons that they have those ideas that don't involve 5-paragraph essay writing, okay? If you're a high school teacher and you're wondering how in the world they can do that, check out an elementary school. You'll see some amazing sorts of things. One other point here about the assessment. If you're a 10th grade or an 11th grade teacher and you think you're going to teach your kids how to write arguments beginning on day 1, good luck to you. Don't call me up, because I'm going to tell you right now, you should start saving your money for beer money to buy it for kindergarten teachers, because they are going to save you. It turns out that talking about arguments and evidence is hard but not impossible. Learning how to write arguments with evidence is really, really challenging. My doctoral students still struggle with this. So any idea that middle school, high school, starting to write arguments with evidence there, it's just not going to happen. We have to start working with kids at very young ages to do this kind of work, particularly on the writing side of that sort of thing. All right? We also have additional additional tasks, and that's this notion down here of taking informed action. I'm going to say some more about that in a minute. And then sources have 3 purposes. We use sources to spark kids' curiosity, we use sources to build their knowledge, and we use sources to help. That's one of the places that they can use to draw on for evidence. All right? So that's the blueprint. Every one of the 84 inquiries has this as the second page. The first page, of course, is a splashy picture. But the second page of every one of the inquiries is this blueprint, a 1-page representation of all of the ideas that we think are useful when it comes time to teaching a particular topic. All right, so that's the sort of quick overview. There are 3 things that I think are really pretty new about this Toolkit project. Questions, taking informed action, and teacher expertise and agency. So, questions. Thomas Berger said, the art and science of asking questions is the source of all knowledge. Knowledge, as we say in Maine, wicked important. But if you don't have a question, then you don't have really access. What do you have the knowledge for if you're not trying to pursue the answer to some question? So we just have a foundational belief in the importance of asking really good questions. And we use the language of compelling. Compelling questions have to meet 2 criteria. First of all, they have to have some intellectual meat. They have to have some academic value. There has to be something worth talking about. But the other thing that compelling questions have to have is they have to be relevant to kids. They have to speak to kids' lives. Not in a trite, clever, patronizing kind of way, because kids will see through that in a heartbeat, and they'll ask you, in effect, do your damn job. Come up with something that's actually worth talking about. But a question that has both intellectual rigor to it and a direct connection to something that kids might care about, that's what we're looking for. So, there's a couple examples. Compelling or maybe not so compelling. What were the causes of the Industrial Revolution, and where are we? Compelling? Don't nod, talk. This will be audience participation too. No. Neither one of them? No, of course not. Causes of the Industrial Revolution, why would that not be compelling? Just sounds like regular old school, doesn't it? You know? You walk into the class on Monday morning, you say, I've been up all weekend. I can't get this question out of my head. I tried alcohol. I need your help. What, friends, were the causes of the Industrial Revolution? Kids will think you've lost your mind, right? And you'll have their attention for a little while. But as soon as you start going through it, bonk, there go their heads down. Now, is it the case that the Industrial Revolution is not important, and the causes of it? Is it important? Of course it is. Of course. How can you understand the concept of Industrial Revolution if you don't know what the sort of notion of causes are? But maybe that's not where you start. Maybe that's not where you start. Maybe there's some other question related to the Industrial Revolution that's going to get under kids' skin. Again, not just to be clever or cute or particularly patronizing kind of way, but a question that gets at the heart of the Industrial Revolution that's going to speak to the lives that your kids live. What about this other one? Where are we? Now imagine walking into a third grade class, because that's the global year. Been up all weekend, can't get this question out of my head. Started drink. No, I won't say that part. I can't get this question out of my head. I need your help. Where are we? What are third graders likely to do? First of all, they're going to think, you've lost your mind, just like the 10th graders would for the first question. But what happens then? Do their heads hit the desk? I don't think quite yet. What are their answers going to be? School. But that's actually not where they are. Where are they? They're in room, whatever it is, in the school. And where else are they? Louder? They're in their seats in the classroom in the school. Nice, nice. And they're in a state, but they're also in a county and in a country and in a town. Maybe in New York it's a hamlet, right? Whatever that word means. It turns out that we are in lots and lots of different places. What's that going to do to a third grader's mind? Whoa! How can that be? Now, that probably will end your 20 minutes social studies time in third grade. I guarantee you, half of your kids are going to go home and say to their parents, Mom, where are we? And that's going to lead to a discussion. What has that question, I argue, what has that question done? It's gotten under those kids' skin. It's gotten under those kids' skin. Now, if you have a budding philosophy student, you're going to have a kid go, and where are we? Right? Because it turns out to be kind of a metaphysical question as well, right? Right? So I'd argue that I could use that question with third graders and do some really cool stuff on geography. If you can't see it with your third graders, is it compelling? In other words, compelling questions are not absolute. There's no absolute guarantee that if you use one of these, it's going to, without fail, get under your third graders or fifth graders or seventh graders' skin, and you're going to be teacher of the year. It depends on your knowledge of it, your interest in it, your kids, all the things that go into teaching. All of the things that go into teaching. That's what will make a compelling question compelling in your classroom. Do you see my point? We gave it our best shot over 1 year and $3 million to get 84 of these things that we think can work. But if it doesn't work for you, doesn't work for your kids, that's why we publish them in Word. Change it. And if you really don't like it at all, write your own damn inquiry. I'll talk about that in a minute too. All right, so compelling questions we think is the first thing that really feels new-ish about this Toolkit project. We're not dismissing content at all, but we're saying in the face of having too much content, we need to figure out ways to kind of bound it. And a question, if it's got any intellectual meat to it, if it's got any relevance to kids, a question can be a way to draw a circle around a set of content that seems coherent. The second thing that we think is new is this taking informed action idea. Guys who look like me, old white-haired guys, we've been talking about the notion of having kids do something with what they learn in class forever. Forever. And yet teachers have always said, yes, we're listening, we're not doing. Because what that sounds like is putting the kids on a bus and sending them to the mayor's office, and then I'm going to get another job. Well, there are places in New York State and the rest of the country where you can do that and still keep your job, but maybe not in Jamestown. So we really pushed ourselves. If we really think that kids need opportunities to do something with what they've learned about the French Revolution, then we ought to be able to think of ways that they can do that and have you be able to keep your jobs. So we came up with this notion of taking informed action with the emphasis on the word informed. Because everybody in this room knows you can rile kids up about one thing or another, get them all excited, but if it's not informed, if it's not based in anything content-wise, then you're just doing an exercise, and that's probably not worthwhile. So we think there are 3 pieces to putting together a taking informed set of opportunities. First of all, kids have to understand the issue at hand. They have to do some work. Second, they have to assess what the options actually are for action, because no situation has only one set of actions that could go with it. And then and only then, after they've understood it and after they've thought about what they could do, that's when kids actually apply the action and do something. So here's an example of here's what the chart that we came up with to show the range of things that kids can do. So across the bottom is the complexity of the effort. Understand on the far left, assess options, apply action. And then on the vertical line, you can do things in the classroom, in the school, and then in the community as the location of where kids can take action. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, researching an issue relevant to an inquiry counts as action. If you do a unit on Neolithic revolution, but you use something that's happening in the world today as a way to extend that, you're doing taking informed action. You're not going to get fired for that. Simply bringing the ideas of the past into the present is a way of taking action, we argue. As you move across the scale, identifying the actual problems and things that kids might do related to that issue is the assessing part of taking action. And then look at the array of things that you might do where kids could actually apply the action. Everything from having a conversation with a classmate to organizing a boycott. Conversations when kids are talking with one another in the classroom about their ideas, about their reasoning behind their ideas, we argue that that's taking action. Well, some of us do. I have a big argument with one of my colleagues about it. She says that having a conversation between kids in class is just too much like doing school. She's wrong. I'm right that it is, because think about what the most of the interaction is in classrooms. Kid to teacher, teacher to kid, back and forth. Having kids say what their arguments are and their evidence for those arguments is so different, I argue, that it counts as a form of action. Anytime that you get a chance to try out your ideas, and more importantly, try out the evidence for your ideas, I think that qualifies as taking informed action. Because we all know there are lots of ways to try out your ideas. We're going to have Thanksgiving very soon. Every one of you probably has Grandpa. Grandpa states his argument, and then he states it louder with more swear words, right? And when you ask Grandpa for evidence, then it really gets bad. And then everybody needs another glass of wine. That's on the road to making arguments, but that's not argument making and supporting. So we want to teach kids the value of being able to state crisply what their ideas are, what their arguments are. But what we really want to teach kids, and this is the tough part, what's the evidence that supports that argument? What's the evidence that supports that argument? Now, kids being kids and not really knowing how to do this, particularly in writing, what's one of the first ways that they're going to support their argument? Copying the first 3 lines of whatever source they have in front of them. And they're going to expect you to give them a big old A because they copied it correctly. The fact that it may actually contradict the argument that they're trying to make, well, what do you want, right? So this making and supporting, the making not so hard, the supporting hard, particularly when it comes to writing. That's the place that we think is really going to matter. And then expressing those arguments in these multiple kinds of forms, we think really is a way to make all of this kind of happen. Kathy Swan, one of my colleagues, says this is where the magic happens, is in the taking informed action piece, because that's where kids get to do something. We have, in New York State, an official state snack, right? Somebody said it? Yogurt. Now, yogurt's lovely, but why is it our official state snack? because the dairy industry lobbied for it, right? Yes, they did, except they didn't have the idea. Some fourth grade kids near Rochester were having a conversation, fourth grades, when you talk about New York State. They got the list of all the things that are official New York things, the New York State bird, the New York State rock, the New York State fossil, because just having a rock isn't enough, the state fern. It's a long list. Now, I don't know if this is how it happened, but I've got a pretty good idea. The teachers and the kids are kind of working through this, and then that kid right back there says, hey, there's no state snack on here. What do most teachers do? Yes, Jimmy, we know. Move on. Let's move on. But this teacher didn't. They end up having a conversation about it. Probably thought of 100 other things that there should be a state something of. But they got kind of hooked on this notion of of an official state snack. Ended up bringing in their state representative, and that person got kind of excited about it. And where did yogurt come from? How can you imagine that they came up with yogurt? Dairy farms and a Chobani yogurt factory nearby. You're going to talk about a state snack? I'm not sure most kids would come up with yogurt, but they did. They got the state representative involved. They got as soon as the State Dairy Association heard about it, they got very interested. And then a year or so later, you have the state legislature, state assembly, state senate debating, A, whether there should be an official state snack, and B, what it would be. Because you can imagine, you got the Apple people in there, you've got all kinds of controversy. There's a hilarious Jon Stewart video about all of this, by the way. Eventually it passes the Assembly and the Senate, and Andrew Cuomo signs it into law. We have, in New York, an official state snack because of fourth graders. That's taking action, baby. Now, let me give you another example. Some kids were doing the inquiry that we wrote on needs and wants. Kindergarten kids know anything about what they want and what they need? Lots of ideas about that. The kindergarten kids of the teacher who told me this story came back one day from the lunchroom, irate. No syrup with the pancakes. You know anything about kindergarten kids? You know they take their syrup and their pancakes very seriously. Again, what would most teachers do? Listen a little while and then say, okay, time for math. Let's move on. But this teacher didn't. They'd been working on this idea of needs and wants. Here's a perfect illustration in their life today of the difference between a need and a want. So eventually, the kids decided they needed to go down and talk with the lunch ladies. So the teacher trooped them on down. They had a little confab with the lunch ladies, who explained that the reason that the syrup got cut is because there was a mid-year budget cut in their budget. Something had to go. They made the decision that it was going to be syrup. They hoped it would come back next year, but they couldn't guarantee that. Now, that's an instance where the kids didn't win, right? They got upset. They had a chance to air their ideas, but they didn't win. They didn't get syrup that year with their pancakes. Do you think that experience created cynical, disaffected, anti-voting, never-to-be-good citizen kids? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they probably got the syrup next year because they went home and did some lobbying, and they understood you want something from adults, you start making a case. Now, did they do that in the most academic of senses? Maybe not. But that idea that you have an idea, you rally support for that idea, and then you can take action on that idea, you can't buy that with $1 million. So this notion of giving kids opportunities, not silly, trite kinds of opportunities, but real opportunities to see how their ideas and their actions can play a role, invaluable in social studies, just invaluable. And we're seeing that happen all over the state. Okay, so we're going to have the video now. This is one of the four videos that we did in connection with the project that take one of the elements of it. So this is the one on taking informed action. Pay special attention when the little skinny girl with the blonde hair comes on at the end.
What we tried to do in the toolkit is really honor the nature of what we call taking informed action. So the way that we defined taking informed action in the C3 framework was a process. It wasn't just community service. We weren't having students act without being informed. So each of the inquiries goes through a three-step process of understanding an issue, spending time researching it, fully understanding it, assessing that current issue, and then and only then acting.
I think the tasks as well as taking informed action
girl at the end. I'm going to preview it for you because it's still worth seeing. Fourth grade girl, this tall, this wide, glasses like this, is asked by the interviewer, so I understand in this unit you've been doing something different. And she said, oh, this unit has been totally different than anything we've ever done before. It's really cool. Now, her teacher was standing there, of course, too, and cringing a little bit, but got it, that, yeah, the kids really like this. And then the interviewer said to her, I understand that through this inquiry, you guys think that you can change the world. Do you think you can change the world? Totally. So this notion of not only getting under kids' skin with questions, but giving them opportunities to then think about how they might have an influence on their local or bigger world just is really, really powerful. All right, the third thing that's new in the toolkit. It appeared when the Common Core was rolled out that teachers had no experience and expertise. The Common Core modules, I'm sure, have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff, some of which is very smart. But it sent a message that what you've been doing in literacy and mathematics is wrong. Here's the right way to do it. Follow the script. Well, many of you are probably parents. You would have loved to have a script, but you don't have one. It's about figuring it out, using judgment, using your expertise, thinking about things. And we think the absolute same holds for teachers. There's simply no way to script the act of teaching in a way that's going to be useful for all the kids in your classes. Yes, there are ideas. Yes, there are practices. There are all kinds of things that we can do with kids. But it depends entirely on the teacher's capacity to be able to use those things in flexible ways that are going to be sensitive to the particular needs that you have. So I just love this slide because, first of all, it's about guys who very, very dead, but had smart things to say. Aristotle said the one exclusive sign of thorough knowledge is the power of teaching. You all know that when you're first starting to teach, one day you probably even can remember the topic. You were teaching away, and all of a sudden you realized, I do not really know what I'm talking about anymore. But I'm going to keep talking because maybe the kids won't notice, and some of them probably didn't, but I bet some did. And then you went, and then you actually learned the topic. It's an amazing sort of thing, humbling sort of thing, to learn how much you really, really don't know until you try to teach it to someone else. Horace Mann said, a teacher who is attempting to teach without inspiring the pupil with a desire to learn is hammering on cold iron. Every teacher in this room has hammered on some damn cold iron before as well, like the Friday before spring break. There's a lot of iron, and it is dead cold, even though it's starting to warm up. And then I think this is the best one. Alexander the Great said, "I am indebted to my father for living, but to my teacher for living well." That four-letter word, well, makes all the difference. Because every one of you has some number of kids who are just managing to live because of their circumstances at home, their circumstances in their community, in school, whatever it is. All they are doing right now is living until they get to your class. And then they get a chance to live well because you give them things that nobody else can give them. That's power, my friends. That's power. So what's next? We've published 84 of these inquiries. They are all available on c3teachers.org/inquiries. There's a long story about why they are not on Engage New York, but you'll have to buy me a beer in order to hear that. So C3 Teachers, the C3 framework, we developed a website. That's where we're housing all of this work. Every one of the inquiries is available there. They're searchable by grade level, by topic. It's a rudimentary kind of search engine at this point, but it will get you where you want to get. As I said before, we're publishing them in PDF and in Word. So if you don't like the way that we've presented topic X, get in there and mess around with it. Play with it. Do with it what you need to do in order to make it something that's going to get under your particular kid's skin. And you don't need to write to me and ask my permission to do that. We expect you to do that. In fact, Joe and Andrew and I were just in New Orleans at the National Council for Social Studies meeting last week, and we had one of our third grade teachers presenting the inquiry that she wrote. Her presentation was about how she changed the inquiry that she wrote. So if you can get one of the writers to put, and we worked weeks on this particular inquiry, for her to start teaching it and realizing, I got to tweak supporting question number 2, and I don't like that source, that tells you these things are to be molded to the particular situation where you work. Okay? Third thing is you can design your own. That website, c3teachers.org/inquiry design model, will pull up a blank blueprint for you, and you can input it and produce it and hand it out to all of your friends. Now, the 2 more things. You can also share your inquiries and your experiences. We have about 30 teachers in the country who are blogging about their experience using compelling questions and arguments and all of that sort of thing. We would invite you, if you're of that sort of orientation, to become one of our bloggers, to talk about your experiences as you try to work with inquiries. The other thing that's not there, because it is literally just came up over the weekend, is the inquiry generator. We now have, so if you go to C3 Teachers, I think it's c3teachers.org/inquiry generator, all one thing, you can actually do an online version of it and actually save it online. We are not yet in the position where we can start vetting and then adding to the number of inquiries that we have, but that will be coming soon. My dream is that in 3 years, we have 10 different inquiries on the French Revolution, all with different compelling questions, different sources, different supporting questions, different cuts on the way that we can teach the French Revolution and every other topic, because we know there's no one right way to do it. And we also know that teachers are great at taking ideas from one place and putting them into another place, and there are going to be teachers who say, I can see why you wrote those 10 inquiries on the French Revolution, but I'm going to add the 11th. And that's exactly what we think this kind of tool is best going to represent in terms of giving teachers a set of ideas to be playful with and then working with around their kids. That's all I got for you. So what's on your minds? Yeah?
When can we expect to start using the inquiry?
But today's Monday, Tuesday? Go right to it. Now you can turn on your account and look it up. I often get the question, you got six of these per grade level, how do we do all 6 in a year? And my answer is, that would be insane to do. You've already got a curriculum. You're already teacher of the year in at least half of the things you do. We all have some dogs, right? My suggestion is do 1 or 2 of these a year. Try it. Nobody from state ed is going to come around and say, what inquiry are you on? So try it out. See how the kids respond. See how it feels to you as a teacher. If you want to do 2 of them next year, imagine if teachers simply did 2 inquiries with the taking informed action piece per year. By the time kids graduated, they would have had 26 opportunities to do something real with the social studies stuff. That in itself would revolutionize what social studies is all about. Just 2 inquiries with taking informed action a year. Now, do I think that you could transform all of your current units with a new compelling question? Absolutely. But there's simply no way that you can do an inquiry-based sort of approach to every one of the topics that you teach. It's just too much. It's too much stuff. Kids will not stay past 180 school days, unfortunately. You know? What else? Yeah?
Right now I'm in the process 8th grade using inquiry is pretty good. And
I'm sorry, what?
is pretty good, 8th grade on industrialization and like chemical industry, et cetera. I was wondering how the group chose the documents, because obviously I'm modifying it some of those documents are at a very high level.
Yep.
Carnegie's, Gospel of Wealth and
Yeah.
the one political cartoon. I was wondering the process to the decision on the documents.
That was probably the hardest thing to do. Coming up with compelling questions was rough. All that other stuff, hard work. I'm not going to lie to you. But coming up with sources, and you notice that we use the language of featured sources, so it's not all of the sources. And you also notice that what's missing from the list of sources? Say textbooks. Textbook, yeah. We didn't put textbooks in. Why didn't we put textbooks in? It is not because we think textbooks are bad. Some of them are bad. Some of them are bad. But we didn't put textbooks in, A, because we know that you already have those, and we wanted to kind of push the idea that there could be other kinds of sources to look at. And B, we know that in some cases you're going to need to do those textbook excerpts, perhaps, because some of the sources that we picked are too challenging for your kids. But we also know that the sources that we picked we think are really, really useful. And we know that you have strategies of bringing tough, challenging texts. Often it's the texts that are most challenging, although political cartoons can be really challenging as well. We know that you have strategies for bringing those to kids. And one of the things that we argue strongly for is the idea of excerpting. So in many cases, we put the whole document in, but we encourage you to pull out the paragraph that you think will really work with all of your kids. And we have no problem with that. But the notion of featured, only 2 or 3 or 4 sources, really was in part a time thing because we only had 1 year to do this, a space thing because we wanted to make sure that it all got on one page. Most of the units we put in additional sources as well because we know that not all kids are going to be able to read all of those. And we don't want the challenge of text being the thing that kicks kids out of the conversation. One of the things that we've learned as teachers have piloted this is that it is the special ed kids who respond most enthusiastically to this. Most enthusiastically, the special ed kids. And if we had time for inquiry, I would let you figure out why that is, but I'm just going to tell you. It's because they don't have to guess what's on the teacher's mind as the right answer. They can be as right as the kid who always gets the A's, because their argument persuades the other kids in the class. And a host of other things. it re-levels the playing field, having kids be able to do this kind of work as opposed to memorize a bunch of stuff and give it back to me exactly as I gave it to you. What else? Sure.
What are you doing to work with school administrations, particularly staff development directors that are prescribing, follow the modules verbatim, everybody on the same page every day?
Yep.
And if you're not doing that, you're going to be reprimanded.
The question is, what do you do with administrators? And I can say that because I was the dean for a while, so I get that question. It's going to be, one of the things that's been so interesting is the response from teachers to this idea has been overwhelmingly positive, and the response from administrators has been some smiles, some nods, some encouragement, and some, oh lordy, what am I going to do with this? We know it's going to be a tough slog for some administrators who bow every day to Albany and look for the truth, and that's the truth that they get from Albany is going to be the truth that they enforce in their schools, and it's going to be a tough sled for them. I'll tell you, however, if you get a chance to work on an inquiry, it's infectious. It gets under your skin, and the power of seeing kids engaged in real conversations about real ideas and then being able to do stuff, there's just nothing like it. But to that end, I spend probably half of my time talking with administrator groups, professional development groups, all those folks. And I'll tell you, it's mostly a receptive crowd because I think folks are a little tired of ELA and math all the time. And they are starting to see they're starting to see the confines of that. Yeah?
You mentioned earlier, if I heard you right, you were pretty confident this was going to be reflected. You believe it if you were testing and stuff like that? What is it that leads you?
What in the world is my evidence for that? Good question. I'm surprised it waited this long. A couple of things. One, in the redesign of the state regents test for Global 10, which is going on right now, the first big change is going to be that the multiple choice questions will not be 50 random got you kinds of specific kinds of factoid things. The model for the multiple choice section will be the AP redesign, where there'll be a piece of stimulus, a text, a graph, a chart, and then there'll be 3 to 5 questions related to the topic that stimulus speaks to. Not only, and it's really less about the specific content than it is about the social studies practices, the social studies skills. Can kids gather and interpret the evidence from that source? Can they use their economic reasoning to evaluate that source? So, in some ways, this is a sea change in the way that multiple choice questions will be constructed. While there's still all kinds of content in the state framework, the way that content is being broadcast as important for the test is as examples rather than the must-have kind of things. So that's one big change. The second is, you all know what the DBQs look like. They were supposed to be, the real DBQs on the AP exams are argument and evidence-based argument tasks. When the DBQs were constructed for the New York State exams back in the 1990s, somebody must have thought that was going to be too hard because they modified it to the describe, explain thing, which I argue very strongly actually disadvantages kids, but they didn't listen to me at that time. The big news about the redesign of the state exams is nobody's sure what the extended response task is going to be, but there is universal agreement that it will be argument-based. So the idea that every one of the 84 inquiries ends in the kids making and supporting an argument, directly applicable to what they're going to need to do on the state test. I think those two messages in and of themselves, I think, are absolutely coherent with the Toolkit Project and absolutely coherent with where I think assessment can go. We are not to the stage where kids are going to actually do a performance-based, authentic kind of situation. But if we can get the change in the multiple choice and the DBQ, the extended response, I can live with that. Because there's always tomorrow. Yep.
You made a comment earlier that to try to do argument improve in middle school and high school, start at that level is very difficult. We really need to start with kindergarten.
Yep.
Is there any movement at the state to have more requirement in regards to the elementary levels to require social studies? Because what we're seeing is there's hardly any.
Yep.
So ultimately, it is on potentially the middle school and high school teachers to
Yep.
first stab at this. Do you know at the state level if there's going to be a pushback in regards to make sure social studies being taught at the elementary level?
Nope. New York State is loath to make those kinds of requirements, unfortunately. Now, let me say two things. One is an echo of what I said before. I think teachers are going to realize, and administrators eventually will realize, that if we want kids to do well on the state exams, and of course we want them to do well on the state exams, then this business about making and supporting arguments is going to have to happen a lot earlier. And while some of it's going to happen through ELA, there's no reason in the world that it couldn't happen through social studies and, frankly, science and other places. One of the things that the commissioner added, as if writing 84 inquiries and professional, all that wasn't enough, he said, oh, would you also write a white paper on assessment? Because we'd like to get some new ideas about how that might go. Well, of course, they started revising the assessment, or the assessments before we even started with the toolkit. But one of the things that we argued in this white paper was that we have a K through 12 social studies curriculum. We test global history in 10, and we test US history in 11. There's a whole lot of stuff that's not being assessed or tested. So we made the argument in the white paper that we think it's very important for there to be an elementary and middle school assessment, not test. Those are not the same thing. But imagine the possibilities if there was an elementary school assessment that might be tied to one of these inquiries, where the kids actually made arguments and did a taking informed action, and that was the assessment of whether they knew something or not. Same thing with middle school. I think that there would be huge, that would send huge positive vibrations out through the, not only the education community, but the community at large. In other words, letting folks know, parents and community members know that kids are doing something real. I think that would be hugely important.
Thank you very much for being
Absolutely.
here. A little gift from the Jackson Center.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, all.